Chapter 8. Almondo opened the door for us as we arrived. He still had the weapon in his hand, which caused Gloria's eyes to open wide. "We're having trouble with vermin," Almondo said, indicating the pistol. She smiled, glancing back and forth from Almondo's grim face to his weapon. "I'm Almondo, the physician," he said. "You're Gloria, undoubtedly." "But how did you know?" Of course," she said suddenly. I'd been studying the assorted boxes, packages, and bundles ever since I had entered the house. Outwardly, they were as though nothing was wrong. Inwardly, I could detect nothing either, but there was one more box than necessary. I examined the contents by mental perception, then grinned rather foolishly. "I guess perhaps I'm a little trigger-happy." Almondo frowned when I gave him the concept of trigger-happy. "What's in the extra box?" he asked. "A loudspeaker for a radio. It was attached to the one I saw when I purchased it." Yes," Almondo murmured. "What do you mean by that?" I asked. Almondo replied telepathically, "To be candid, I'm not expecting you to be overly alert." "Why?" I asked silently. "I've told you all about it," Almondo replied. Gloria's cheeks became flushed, and I realized that her perceptive abilities were great enough to catch our conversation. "Well, perhaps you two would like to help me unpack my purchases?" I suggested brightly. Immediately, the three of us set to work. I was curious about you, how you were getting along, but I didn't want to reveal your existence yet to Gloria. Almondo had gathered this and didn't turn his thought toward you. Many of the items I had purchased aroused no response in Almondo, but Gloria was obviously puzzled by what I planned to do with some of them. In a short time, the floor was littered with paper, boxes, and packing materials, and Gloria began picking them up. "These must have cost a great deal," she said. $7,956.52, I murmured, studying the radio receiver. Suddenly, I turned and looked at her. "Surely you don't expect us to have trouble with the monetary system?" "I don't know," she sighed. "I had enough trouble." "Yes, that's true," I replied, slowly. "You were under control." "Now that you mention being under control," Almondo said, "suppose I fix some food." "Can I help?" Gloria asked, quickly. "I imagine you can help the great thinker here. Yes, help him decide what he's going to do with all this trash. Frankly, I think he's accumulated it just to occupy his time for the next 5 years." Almondo picked up the bags of groceries. "I think I shall try some novel experiments. Perhaps I can turn out something that is not nauseating." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the disc the watcher had given me. "Here's something else to toy with." I flipped it toward Almondo. Almondo released his hold on one of the bags, caught the disc, then caught the bag before it touched the floor. Gloria seemed to regard this as some sort of feat. "Think nothing of it," I said. "You can probably do it in time. Remember, one's reactions slowed to a crawl when they're under control." Almondo chuckled. "How true." I scowled at him, then helped Gloria clean up the mess we'd made. She seemed to be enjoying herself, which I decided was natural enough under the circumstances. One is mentally dull and depressed when under the control of another. I felt oddly exuberant and found a great deal of pleasure in showing Gloria the house. We passed by your bedroom, and I'd planned to say nothing, but she paused in her stride. Her mental impression revealed that she knew you were there. "I'll tell you about it later," I said. She smiled at me. "I won't ask questions," she said. "Maybe I guess I'm intruding. I should go." "Nonsense," I replied. You do not wish to go, so why should you? She blushed self-consciously. No, I don't want to go, but I feel I'm imposing, interfering in your affairs. Would it make you feel different if I said that I want you to stay? I don't think you're imposing on us, so why should you? She smiled again. You're very kind. I took her arm and guided her from room to room. Her eyes took in the features rapidly, and I was pleased that her mental stability and reactions were improving so quickly. One room was particularly pleasing to her. Would you like this room for your own? I asked. It had little furniture, judging by earthly standards, but it was a bit more frilly than the other rooms. The dressing table had a large circular mirror and was rather low. Oh, yes, she replied. It's very nice. That reminds me, she added abruptly. What of my belongings? You have a lodging someplace else? I asked. Well, just a very small room. Do you have anything you consider of value? Only some things I've gathered up. I nodded. I suggest that we let him go. We can get more. I turned around and surveyed the room. Well, this is your room, then. She walked over to one of the windows and stood, looking out. The sun, having already set, cast red streaks across the deepening blue of the sky, bathing the room in a warm crimson. I detected a sadness about her, a longing, perhaps, and there was something in that sadness that was familiar to me. I couldn't understand why it should seem familiar, this sadness, this longing. And then I remembered the afternoon on Arkna, the music of the Lind and the song of spacemen. That was it, the yearning to be free, to travel to far and distant places, the longing to know what was beyond the horizon, ever seeking. The room was now darkening, and Gloria turned from the window, sighing. We walked back down the short hallway, entering a larger room. This contained a writing desk and bookshelves, plus several chairs, all equally uncomfortable. I think this would make a good workshop, I said. What are you going to do in it? Gloria asked. Oh, a number of things. First of all, I'm going to move in the equipment I purchased today and set it up. Perhaps we'd better eat first, Almondo said from the doorway. An excellent idea, I agreed. We walked to the small kitchen. Ooh, this is nice, Gloria said. I do not think so, Almondo replied, but that is a matter of viewpoint. I studied the table. The assortment of food was unpleasing to the eye, but it might prove edible. You'll get used to it, Almondo said. At least it's better than you can obtain elsewhere on this world. Perhaps so, I replied, sliding onto the bench. I moved over so that Gloria could sit beside me. I found after a bite or two that I was indeed hungry. The food was also tasty, and I found myself appreciating Almondo's talent. I nearly choked on a bite of food, however, when Gloria asked Almondo, "Why don't you like me?" Almondo's mental processes stopped dead. "Why, he stammered. A puzzled frown appeared on his face. "I'll help with everything I can," she said. "I'll try not to be a burden." Almondo leaned back in his chair, his thoughts well masked from me. "I do not dislike you," he said. "You are, however, a woman. It's unfortunate, but it's not your fault. My life, Jovian's life, yeah, and yours too, depend upon Bach. Anything that distracts his attention is a threat to us all." "I agree with you," she said quickly. "I am a woman, but I'm not the only woman that exists. If Bach's attention can be distracted by me, it can be distracted by another woman. I know that my life depends upon him, and I'm not going to try to distract him, but someone else might." Almondo's eyebrows rose as he sat staring at Gloria. She moved uncomfortably under that steady gaze. "I don't suppose a word from me would be out of order," I said, more out of breaking the silence than anything else. Two pairs of eyes turned to me, one pair desperately, the other sheepishly. I drew a long breath, then said, "Since I'm playing the role of nursemaid, mentor, and savior to us all, a role which is perhaps thrust upon me for dramatic purposes rather than because it's true, I might say this. We've met and conquered an unseen and unknown enemy. That there will be more, I do not doubt. They outnumber us in all probability, and this is our only disadvantage. Gloria is a telepath. She has a highly integrated mind, and I believe is a worthy comrade in time of need. Besides, the code prescribes the action I've taken." "Are you sure?" Almondo asked. "Yes, I'm sure." I said it more sharply than I had intended. It would have been against the code to ignore Gloria's plea for help, hence I acted as I did. True, she was under the control of an enemy, but I've removed that control. Her request for help was sincere, in spite of the control, not because of it, and she still needs help. In return, she can help us, and we need as much help as we can get. Do you think it would strengthen me to be without you?" "No," Almondo replied. "Obviously, two are more capable than one." "In that case, it would be equally foolish to discard whatever help we can find." "I'm beginning to agree," Almondo said thoughtfully. He nodded to Gloria. "You, my dear girl, are far more intelligent than I suspected. I must apologize. Perhaps I've spent too much time on this world looking for disadvantages." He frowned thoughtfully. "I'm not a girl," she informed. Almondo smiled. "I am 170 of these years of age," he said. "Even Bach is a boy to me." Gloria was shocked, and I admit that I was somewhat surprised myself. Almondo showed no outward sign that he was any older than myself. Gloria glanced at me, a look that conveyed much meaning. An imp of mischief stirred in me. "I'm only 140, I said. Almondo looked at me blankly. Gloria tried to smile, without too much success. She swallowed with difficulty, then said, "I'm about 28 or 30 of these years, I guess. I have no way of knowing for sure. Maybe I'm a girl, after all." I opened my mouth to reply, but it never came out. Without warning, my mind was struck by a force I had never before experienced. My body was paralyzed. I knew that someone was shutting off my mind from my body. I struggled, feeling myself slipping, little by little. Second piled on second, slowly, very slowly. Time seemed almost to stand still as I grappled with an unknown, fighting for my life. It seemed that I would surely die. I could feel life ebbing from my body. Then the hold relaxed slightly. Instead of trying to coordinate myself, I threw all of my resources at that other mind. It recoiled and attacked again with savage fury. My body was breathing again, but little more than that. I strained, pressed, forced every ounce of will against that unknown mind. Gradually, it began to weaken. Then another entity groped for me, and the first one let go. In hardly a second's time, I prepared to meet a new and perhaps fatal struggle. But to my surprise, there was no attack. I realized then that the second mind had struck to make me release the first. I felt dizzy, yet I probed outward, found nothing, then collapsed.